When the avoidant first sees the anxious partner being replaced, it hits them like a flash of lightning out of nowhere, a jarring disruption to the calm detachment they believed they had carefully cultivated all along. They had spent so much time convincing themselves that the anxious one's presence was guaranteed, that they could withdraw, and the other would still be there waiting patiently in the background. So when they witness someone new stepping into that place, laughing with the same warmth, receiving the same attention that once belonged to them, it scrambles their inner world in ways they were not prepared for. Their mind can't reconcile how quickly the anxious one could shift their focus, and it feels like something impossible has happened right before their eyes, something that breaks the very rules they had written for how this dynamic was supposed to work. This shock is not loud or visible on the outside, but internally it creates a silent alarm that won't turn off, and suddenly the space they once thought they wanted feels unbearably hollow. In that hollow space, a strange discomfort begins to grow because they are seeing their old patterns lose their power for the first time. They had pulled away, withdrawn, taken their time, thinking they had endless chances to return, but now that choice has been taken away from them, and they do not know how to process that loss of control. It is not just about the person being replaced, it is about their identity as someone who believed they could always decide the terms of connection and disconnection. Seeing someone else welcomed into the spot they once had forces them to confront the fact that they are no longer the center of that person's emotional world, and that realization cuts deeper than they imagined it could. The shock carries a bitter edge because it challenges the avoidant's long-held belief that love can be paused, shelved, and picked up again whenever they feel like it. Now they are witnessing love continue without them, and it leaves them disoriented and almost suspended between disbelief and panic, as though the ground beneath their emotional footing has shifted overnight. As this shock spreads through them, they begin noticing how their mind keeps drifting back to memories they once dismissed, moments they had quietly assumed didn't matter to the anxious one as much as they actually did. It is as if every small shared memory is now tinged with the knowledge that someone new might be creating those same moments, maybe even better ones, and that thought stings in ways they can't admit to anyone. The image of the anxious person turning their attention elsewhere keeps looping through their thoughts, and it pulls them into a state of quiet mental chaos where they question everything they assumed about how replaceable or irreplaceable they were. They start wondering if they misread the entire relationship, if their belief in the anxious one's unwavering loyalty was just an illusion they clung to for safety. The shock keeps amplifying because it is not only about being replaced, but about realizing they were never as secure in their emotional position as they once believed. Inside, this creates a restless energy that makes it hard for them to focus on anything else because part of them wants to undo what has already happened, even though they know they cannot. The avoidant is not used to feeling powerless, and this sudden reversal forces them to sit with emotions they have spent years avoiding. They start scrutinizing the new person, mentally picking apart everything about them to try to find flaws. Anything that could prove this change is temporary, but that only deepens their discomfort when they see no obvious weakness to dismiss. What shakes them even more is realizing the anxious partner seems genuinely lighter now, as if their absence has brought relief instead of longing, and that flips the avoidance world upside down. The shock becomes a constant hum in their mind, reminding them that they miscalculated, that they let go of something they assumed would never really leave. Even though they might try to hide it, this internal upheaval keeps echoing through their behavior, making them unusually distracted and irritable because they are still trying to comprehend how quickly everything shifted. They keep replaying the moment they found out as though rewinding it could somehow reveal a different outcome, but every replay only sharpens the reality they are struggling to accept. This sudden change has disrupted the emotional script they relied on, and their system is scrambling to rewrite it without the part where they were always in control. They can't fully grasp how something that once felt like their constant has turned into something distant, separate, and untouchable. It leaves them standing still, watching a door they thought was always open slam shut without warning, and the echo of that shock keeps ringing louder inside their chest. After the initial shock begins to settle into their system, a new and far more unsettling emotion starts creeping in. something the avoidant rarely acknowledges within themselves but can no longer push away now that the anxious partner has been replaced. It is jealousy, not the dramatic kind that bursts out in obvious ways, but a quiet and corrosive jealousy that slips beneath their skin and lingers like a whisper they can't silence. They find themselves staring longer than they should at any sign of affection between the anxious one and the new person, analyzing gestures, smiles, and subtle exchanges as if decoding a secret language. Each glimpse stirs a dull ache because they cannot escape the comparison that forms automatically in their mind, and they begin wondering if this new person is offering something they never could. This thought unsettles them deeply because it threatens the fragile identity they've built around being the one who holds emotional power by staying detached, and now they see someone else effortlessly holding the place they once assumed was unshakable. The jealousy twists itself into their thoughts like vines, tightening whenever they imagine the anxious one laughing in ways they rarely saw during their time together. They notice how relaxed and open the anxious person seems, and it ignites a quiet fear that maybe they were the reason that light was dimmed before. Instead of confronting that possibility, they instinctively direct their energy into scrutinizing the new partner, searching for flaws, trying to mentally dismantle them to prove they are not truly a threat. But the harder they look, the more it unnerves them that the new person seems steady, confident, and unbothered, the very qualities the avoidant pretended they didn't need yet secretly feared they could never compete with. This silent competition grows in their mind, feeding the jealousy that now colors how they see everything, and it leaves them restless, unable to escape the thought that they have been outmatched in a game they believed they were winning. Their inner world becomes a loop of comparisons where they measure themselves against this replacement in every possible way, even in areas they once dismissed as unimportant. They start replaying old interactions with the anxious one and overlaying them with imagined scenarios of how the new person might handle those same moments better, and each imagined outcome chips away at their sense of superiority. They are haunted by the idea that what they once withheld might now be freely given by someone else, and that makes them feel smaller, as though their uniqueness has been erased. The jealousy becomes heavier because it is no longer just about losing the anxious person, but about facing the possibility that they were never as exceptional in that person's life as they believed. Every smile, every glance, every shared moment between the anxious one and the new partner becomes a subtle reminder that someone else is now experiencing the closeness they once kept at arm's length, and this makes their chest tighten in ways they can't explain. Even when they try to distract themselves, the jealousy follows them like a shadow, slipping into their thoughts during quiet moments and disrupting their concentration. It taints their perception, making them interpret even neutral updates or distant glimpses as personal affronts, as though every sign of happiness from the anxious person is proof that they were easily replaced. This eats at the avoidant because it challenges their belief that they were too important to be let go, and jealousy forces them to imagine a version of reality where they were simply one chapter that closed without consequence. They begin to wonder what qualities they lacked, what flaws pushed the anxious person away, and those questions stir a discomfort they are not equipped to sit with. The jealousy becomes a constant itch, a restless hum in their mind that drives them to seek evidence that this new connection is shallow or doomed. Yet each time they find none, it only deepens the quiet ache gnawing at them. As this jealousy festers, it starts leaking into the way they carry themselves, even if they think they are hiding it well. They become more self-conscious, more alert to how others perceive them, because they are unknowingly trying to prove they are still desirable and significant. It shows in their sudden urge to appear unaffected, in their exaggerated efforts to seem above it all while secretly being consumed by comparison. What unsettles them most is that jealousy is not an emotion they are used to feeling this strongly, and it exposes a vulnerability they have spent years trying to suppress. It makes them feel as though they are watching their former place being erased and rewritten by someone better, and that image replays in their mind like an uninvited loop they cannot pause, feeding the quiet storm that now churns beneath their calm exterior. Once the jealousy has taken root and begun to stir their thoughts into restless comparisons, something even heavier starts rising from underneath it, something that feels less like fire and more like a slow, relentless weight pressing down on their chest. It is regret, and it comes not in a sudden burst, but like a creeping tide that swallows their internal world inch by inch. They begin replaying the moments they pulled away, the texts they left unanswered, the chances they had to open up but instead chose silence. And each recollection hits differently now because it carries the sharp awareness that those chances are gone. What once felt like safety to them, distancing, detaching, keeping control, now feels like sabotage, like they were dismantling something that could have been extraordinary without even realizing it. The realization crawls into their mind that they were not just avoiding closeness, but actively pushing away someone who genuinely wanted to love them. And that truth shakes their perception of themselves in a way that is deeply uncomfortable. This regret forces them to confront the emotional laziness they once disguised as independence. And for the first time, they see how their walls were not protective, but destructive. They think back to all the moments the anxious partner reached out with warmth, with effort, with vulnerability, and they remember how they met that energy with coolness or withdrawal, convincing themselves they were simply being true to who they were. Now those memories look different, colored with the knowledge that the anxious one eventually gave up and gave their warmth to someone else who actually received it. The avoidant starts wondering how things might have turned out if they had been braver, if they had just said how they felt instead of waiting for the perfect, safe moment that never came. Regret wraps around their thoughts like a heavy fog, making even the simplest memory ache with what-ifs, and the weight of that becomes difficult to carry. They had always believed they were protecting themselves from pain, yet now they see they were quietly creating the exact pain they were trying to avoid. As the regret deepens, it begins reshaping how they interpret their entire past with the anxious partner, turning even mundane memories into quiet reminders of what they lost. A simple image of the anxious one smiling, once something they overlooked, now becomes painful because they remember how rare those smiles became in the end and how they contributed to dimming them. They begin to notice how often they took that person's emotional labor for granted, assuming it would be endless, and the guilt of that realization gnaws at them. This guilt fuses with their regret, and together they form a dull ache that lingers no matter how much they try to distract themselves. They catch themselves thinking of moments when they could have held a hand, spoken reassurance, or simply stayed present, and it hits them how many of those moments they carelessly let pass. The regret is relentless because it keeps pointing out how easily things could have been different if only they had chosen connection over fear, and that becomes a thought they cannot escape. They start to feel like they are walking through the ruins of something they once built yet never appreciated until it was gone, and that image clings to them. The presence of the new person only intensifies this feeling because seeing someone else thrive where they failed is like salt in an open wound they cannot close. It makes them realize how replaceable they became by their own doing, and that recognition feeds a sharp internal shame. They begin imagining conversations they wish they had, apologies they never gave, and moments of affection they never offered, as though mentally trying to rewrite the story, even though they know it is far too late. Regret has a way of distorting time for them, making the past feel painfully vivid while the present feels hollow, as if their mind is trapped in replay mode, searching for a way back that no longer exists. Every memory becomes a mirror, reflecting the version of themselves they could have been if fear hadn't ruled their choices, and that reflection leaves them feeling hollow. Even in their daily routines, this regret shadows everything, making them more withdrawn than usual because they are quietly carrying the awareness that they lost something real through their own actions. It gives them a restless heaviness, like they are constantly on the verge of saying something they will never get the chance to say. They notice how easily the anxious partner seems to laugh with the new person, and it sharpens the regret even more, because it proves that the love they once treated like a burden was never the problem. It was their fear of receiving it. That understanding cuts deeply because it forces them to see that they were not abandoned. They were simply outgrown, and the person they once pushed away has now found a place where their love is not punished, but celebrated. This realization blends into their regret, making it heavier, denser, and impossible to ignore as it seeps into every corner of their thoughts, quietly reshaping the way they see themselves and what they let slip away. As the regret keeps gnawing at them from the inside, another feeling slowly rises that shakes the very foundation of how they see themselves, and it is the unsettling sense that they no longer matter in the way they once did. This loss of significance creeps in quietly at first, like a faint echo they try to ignore, but it grows louder each time they see the anxious partner giving their energy, their time, and their affection to someone else. The avoidant had always carried an unspoken assumption that they were irreplaceable, that even if they pulled away, they would still be the invisible center of the anxious person's world, the one who mattered most, no matter how far they drifted. But now they are forced to watch from the outside as their place in that world is not only gone, but has been filled by someone new, and the weight of that dislodges something deep within them. It is not just about being replaced. It is about realizing they are no longer the gravitational pull that once shaped the other person's emotional landscape, and that realization strikes at their core. This loss of significance makes everything around them feel strangely muted, like colors fading from their surroundings, because the emotional validation they once absorbed from knowing they were central is now gone. They find themselves wondering if anyone even thinks of them when they are not around, if their absence is noticed, or if it has already become irrelevant, and those questions rattle their sense of self. It begins to dawn on them that so much of their confidence was quietly tied to being the axis of someone else's emotions, and now that axis has shifted, leaving them spinning without an anchor. They used to be the person who could walk in and out of the anxious one's life knowing they would always be pulled back, but now that magnetic pull has disappeared, and it leaves them feeling strangely hollow. Even their usual coping mechanisms, like detaching or distracting themselves, seem ineffective because they cannot escape the gnawing thought that they have faded from importance entirely. The silence that once felt like power now feels like erasure, and they do not know how to fill the void that has been left behind. As this realization deepens, they begin noticing subtle ways it changes how they see themselves in other areas of life, because losing that central role makes them question their value more broadly. They start doubting their impact on others, wondering if they have always been more forgettable than they imagined, and that thought unsettles them in ways they have never had to confront before. The avoidant has spent so long protecting their independence that they never realized how much they quietly depended on the assurance that someone out there needed them, even if they pretended otherwise. Now, seeing the anxious partner thriving without them, laughing and living freely with someone new, feels like watching proof that they were not essential after all, just temporary. This shakes the image they held of themselves as someone who left a lasting imprint, and it makes them feel small in a way they are not used to feeling. Their self-worth begins to flicker because they can no longer tether it to being missed, and that absence of significance echoes louder than they expected. Even small reminders of their displacement sting in ways they cannot explain, like seeing the anxious person post something joyful or hearing through others how much lighter they seem now. Those moments feel like confirmations that they were not just replaced, but possibly even a burden that had to be lifted, and that implication cuts deeper than they want to admit. It leaves them questioning if their presence ever truly added anything meaningful, or if they were simply occupying space until someone better arrived. This internal questioning becomes relentless, a quiet but constant hum of self-doubt that shadows their thoughts, making them feel like they are fading into the background of a story they once believed they were the main character of. They try to reassure themselves that they still matter, that they are still unforgettable in some way, but the evidence around them keeps contradicting that hope. The realization that life goes on not just without them, but perhaps more beautifully without them presses on their chest like a weight they cannot lift, and they are left trying to figure out who they are when they are no longer central to someone's world. This erosion of significance shifts how they carry themselves, making them more withdrawn and cautious because they no longer trust that their presence carries weight anywhere. It gives their interactions a subtle edge of hesitation, as though they are testing whether they still register to others at all. They become hyper-aware of how easily people move on, and that awareness makes them feel almost transparent, like someone who could disappear and barely cause a ripple. The avoidant never thought they would care this much about mattering to someone, but now that they have lost that role, they can feel how much of their sense of worth had been wrapped around it all along. Each glimpse of the anxious person moving forward becomes a quiet reminder that they are no longer a reference point, no longer the person everything orbits around, and that awareness lingers in the back of their mind, reshaping how they see themselves and leaving them with a hollow space where their certainty used to be. After the shock, jealousy, regret, and loss of significance have all quietly eroded their inner defenses. What begins to settle in is a longing that they cannot name at first, a soft yet persistent ache that hums beneath their thoughts and refuses to be silenced. It does not roar like jealousy or weigh down like regret. It seeps through slowly like a haunting scent of something familiar they cannot reach anymore. The avoidant finds themselves thinking of the anxious partner in fleeting moments, not with the sharp edges of guilt or fear, but with a deep, wistful pull, as though part of them is trying to return to a place they no longer belong. They catch themselves wondering what it would feel like to hear that laugh again, to be on the receiving end of that attention, to have those eyes light up for them instead of someone else. This longing confuses them because they always believed they were safer without that kind of closeness. Yet now the absence of it aches like something missing from their bones. It stirs in them a yearning not just for the person, but for the version of themselves they could have been if they had chosen connection over distance. This longing grows stronger each time they witness how easily the anxious partner seems to share their warmth with the new person, because it reminds them of what they once had and lets slip through their fingers. The sight of that affection being freely given to someone else brings a hollow kind of hunger, a craving for something they once held but never fully tasted. It is not simply about wanting the anxious person back, it is about wanting to feel that deeply connected to someone again. Yet now that desire is tangled with the realization that they may not know how to create it. They begin imagining what it would be like if they had a second chance, fantasizing about saying all the things they never said, offering the reassurance they withheld, and showing up with the consistency they always feared would trap them. These fantasies are bittersweet because they give temporary relief, but are always followed by the sting of reality, the knowledge that this closeness is now happening with someone else. The longing becomes a quiet echo that follows them everywhere, making even moments of distraction feel shallow because a part of them is still reaching back toward what they lost. They start noticing how the longing sneaks into small moments, like hearing a song they once shared or catching a phrase that reminds them of old conversations, and it pulls them into memories they thought they had buried. What unsettles them is how these memories no longer come with the emotional detachment they used to carry. Now they are drenched in warmth and sorrow, like distant sunlight filtered through glass. The avoidant finds themselves aching for things they once dismissed, like simple touches, late-night talks, or knowing someone was always thinking of them, and that yearning makes them feel strangely exposed, even in their solitude. They had once believed that needing someone made them weak, but now they feel the hollowness that comes from having no one to need and no one needing them, and it leaves them disoriented. The longing keeps looping back to the anxious person specifically because they represented a kind of unconditional care the avoidant did not know how to accept, and now that it is gone, they realize how rare and irreplaceable it truly was. That realization sharpens the ache, making it heavier yet softer at the same time, like a bruise that keeps throbbing when touched. Even as they try to convince themselves they have moved on, the longing shows up in their restlessness, in their sudden curiosity about what the anxious person is doing, in their impulse to check for traces of them when they think no one will notice. They search for fragments of familiarity in other people, but nothing quite matches, and that only deepens the sense of absence. This yearning makes them more aware of their own emotional emptiness, as if the world around them has gone quieter and flatter without the vibrant tension that once existed between them and the anxious one. They notice how quickly the anxious partner seems to glow in the presence of the new person, and it creates a hollow ache that whispers they might never be able to inspire that same glow in anyone again. This thought lingers like a shadow over their interactions, making them hesitate, making them feel as though they are always standing just outside of something they want but no longer know how to reach. The longing does not demand or rage. It simply waits, curled quietly inside them like an unanswered question they are too afraid to speak aloud. Over time, this longing becomes the thread that ties all their other emotions together, the quiet undercurrent beneath the shock, jealousy, regret, and loss of significance, pulling them back toward the memory of what they had and the hope of what they could have been. It makes them replay old scenes in their mind, not to analyze or defend themselves anymore, but simply to feel close to those moments again, even if only in imagination. It softens them in ways they do not admit, making their edges feel duller and their solitude heavier, as though something inside them is silently mourning. The avoidant who once felt powerful in their detachment now feels like someone looking through a window at a life they almost lived, and this longing clings to them like a quiet ghost, reminding them that what they pushed away was never a burden, but a kind of love they might spend the rest of their life searching for in everyone else.